I think we're live. Are we live? Okay. I have to do some vacation coverage for some of my partners, so I have to leave for work in about an hour. But I really wanted to get this message out because there's a lot of controversy here in Indiana about critical theory, more specifically critical race theory. So here we go, Hoosiers. And checking the technology here, making sure it works. Okay, Hoosiers, are you feeling overwhelmed by the constant assaults on your God-given natural rights? Do you feel like you are trapped in an endless game of whack-a-mole as the Marxist-inspired revolutionaries and their virtue-signaling useful idiots, individual, corporate, media, and educational lackeys continue to pop up with increasing frequency and intensity? Whack-a-mole. Are you bewildered with the ever-shifting barrage of alphabet soup acronyms? Is this the end of our constitutional republic? Hoosiers, stop. Stop. Take a deep breath. Calm down. Do not despair. There is a way out of this mess. There is a solution. The Constitution solution. Not only the U.S., but the Indiana Constitution. Hello, I'm Dr. Chris McGarrett from Warsaw, Indiana, with yet another episode of The Constitution Solution. I hope all this technology is working. Today, this spur-of-the-moment broadcast, I would like to share with you a very, very important document in our battle with tyranny. And latest, see what I mean? This is unplugged. And our latest conflict with critical theory, and more specifically, critical race theory. A brief background. Critical theory is simply, are you ready for this? Identity-based Marxism. Allow me to repeat that. Identity-based Marxism. If you like acronyms, we'll call it IBM. Identity-based Marxism. Clear your memory of any other definitions. This is all you need to remember. Remember, keep it simple, and you can't be fooled. Why is identity-based Marxism so important to the globalist collectivists at this time? Well, a long time ago, they figured that a traditional Russian Revolution-style class conflict would not work in the United States of America. So, they developed another strategy. Race and identity conflict. Yes, race and identity conflict. This method was developed by a World War II era Italian Marxist, Antonio Gramsci. That's Gramsci. And here is on his writings while in prison in Italy during World War II. Mussolini didn't like communism. This is Karl Boggs' Gramsci's Marxism. Difficult book to get a hold of. In any case, his theory was that the conquest of the West, meaning us Hoosiers, could only come about with a gradual infiltration of Marxist ideology into every aspect of society: government, businesses, churches, and most importantly, schools. Yes, the schools. Progressives of the late 19th century correctly deduced that the best way to change a society was to infiltrate the universities where the teachers are educated, and then to indoctrinate the children in primary schools. You change a society by changing the children. And they have been at it for about 125 years. We have some catching up to do, Hoosiers. The most prevalent form of indoctrination today is in the form of critical race theory, CRT. How do we counter this assault on our constitutional republic? Today, I would like to present for your assessment the May 27, 2001 opinion on the constitutionality and legality of critical race theory by Austin Knudsen. That's Knudsen, first name Austin, Austin. And Mr. Knudsen is the Attorney General of Montana. Here is the report. Here's the report. It's only 25 pages and explains all that you need to know about the legality and constitutionality and about the basis of critical race therapy, critical race theory. Basically, in this binding opinion, this is a binding document in Montana. What he says is the opinion of the Department of Justice of Montana, and it has the force of law. He concludes that critical race theory is illegal and unconstitutional and provides the evidence and the rationale. Now, what I need for you to do, one of you brilliant tech-savvy people out there, is to look this up, this document up, and put the link on a comment here at my post. Can you do that for me, one of you brilliant types? Or a school, somebody with computer savvy skills? Thank you. So again, it's the Attorney General Report, May 27th, 2021, on Knudsen, Attorney General of Montana Department of Justice. I found it, so you can find it. Okay, here we go. I've read through this a couple times. I've highlighted some passages, and I'm going to read through them. And again, I apologize. This is really off the cuff, but the message has to get out and has to get out quickly. So I couldn't wait till my usual time with a more polished report, if such a thing is possible. So bear with me. Here we go. He says, now this is, the whole premise of this is the Superintendent of Public Instruction of Montana asked for an opinion from the Attorney General and the Department of Justice of Montana about the legality and constitutionality of critical race theory and anti-racism and all the other alphabet soup type learning theories. Here is a brief summary. He says, in many instances, the use of critical race theory and anti-racism programming discriminates on the basis of race, color, or national origin in violation of the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment Title VI of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, Article 2, Section 4 of the Montana Constitution, and the Montana Human Rights Act. Now, I've looked this up, and the state-specific part of this we can specify for Indiana is CRT and anti-racism programming is unconstitutional because of Article 1, Section 1 of the Indiana Constitution and what is known as the Indiana Civil Rights Laws. Now, there is no actual one Indiana civil rights law. It's several, and they are codified as IC 22-9-1, IC 22-9-5-6-8. That's what it says. So here we go. It says, Dear Superintendent, you have requested an Attorney General opinion on a question I have restated as follows. Whether the teaching of critical race theory or so-called anti-racism in Montana schools violates the U.S. Constitution, Title VI of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, Article 2, Section 4 of the Montana Constitution, or the Montana Human Rights Act. So, he goes on saying things such as, the truths in the Declaration of Independence, when the founders proclaimed that all men are created equal and that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights. Okay, here's another one. I told you this was unpolished. The 14th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution provides that no state shall deny to any person within its jurisdiction the equal protection of the laws. The Supreme Court has rejected societal discrimination as a legitimate basis for race-conscious classifications. He goes on to talk about Title VI of the Civil Rights Act, and also a little bit about Title VII, which is employment or workplace issues. Title VI of the 1964 Civil Rights Act protects all students who attend institutions receiving federal funding from being treated differently based on their actual or perceived race, color, or national origin. Title VI addresses a number of discriminatory actions, including harassment. Racial and national origin harassment is defined as unwelcome conduct based on a student's actual or perceived race or national origin. Title VII gives employees the right to a working environment free of racial intimidation. We're getting to the better parts, okay? That was just a little background. Here he goes on to state, when evaluating the severity of racial harassment, for example, the law must account for the unique setting and mission of an educational institution. This is because an educational institution has a duty to provide a non-discriminatory environment that is conducive to learning. The type of environment that is tolerated or encouraged by or at school can therefore send a particularly strong signal to and serve as an influential lesson for its students. Younger, less mature children are generally more impressionable than older students or adults. Particularly for young children in their formative years of development, therefore, severe, pervasive, or persistent harassment must be understood in the light of age and impressionability of the students involved and with the special nature and purpose of the educational setting in mind. Bear with me. Critical race theorists attack the very foundations of the liberal legal order, including equality theory, legal reasoning, Enlightenment rationalism, and neutral principles of constitutional law. He cites the writings of two well-known proponents of anti-racism and critical race theory. One of them is Ibram X. Kendi, and the other is Robin DiAngelo. He goes on to say, anti-racism therefore assigns immutable negative characteristics to individuals solely based upon their race or ethnicity. CRT and anti-racism are not merely academic ideas confined to university critical studies courses. Now, remember, this is what they always say. Oh, it's just an obscure academic thing. I heard that a lot the other day at the meeting. Let me repeat that. CRT and anti-racism are not merely academic ideas confined to university critical studies courses. These ideologies have begun to infiltrate mainstream American dialogue and permeate our institutions. It has been embraced by corporations, government organizations, classrooms, and even late-night TV. One major aspect of anti-racism programming involves activities which separate students, teachers, or employees by race. He goes on to say on the Smithsonian's African American History Museum page dealing with whiteness, it asserted that one point that traits such as individualism, hard work, objectivity, progress, politeness, decision-making, and delayed gratifications as hallmarks of white culture. And that statements like colorblindness and meritocracy as actions of bias. The Attorney General goes on to state, I would like to note that all of these traits identified above, far from being hallmarks of merely white culture, are in fact important hallmarks of a virtuous and productive colorblind society. They are self-evident virtues, universally applicable to and shared by people of all races, colors, creeds, and national origins. Because men and women are created equal, they can all equally appreciate and adopt those values. He goes on in his opinion. A minimal investigation into these claims exposes them as, he's talking about critical race theory and the basis for it and the inherent biases in our system. So when criticizing that, he says a minimal investigation into these claims exposes them as hollow rhetorical devices devoid of any legally sufficient rationale for purposes of civil rights law, as well as a threat to the stability of our institutions. Okay, now some quotes about his analysis and conclusions of law. So the first parts were a little bit about background in the CRT as he sees it, and now analysis and conclusions of law. Okay. Government cannot make us equal. It can only recognize, respect, and protect us as equal before the law. And here he's quoting another decision. I conclude, therefore, that key elements of critical race theory and so-called anti-racism education and training, when used to classify students or other Montanans by race, violates the Equal Protection Clause, Title VI, Montana's Individual Dignity Clause, and the Montana Human Rights Act. He goes on, the term anti-racism appears reasonable and innocuous on its face. But, he says, when brought into practice by the CRT proponents, it creates an Orwellian rhetorical weapon. And he goes on to say that according to Mr. Kendi, in an article, How to Be an Anti-Racist, Mr. Kendi says, the only remedy to racist discrimination is anti-racist discrimination. The only remedy to past discrimination is present discrimination. The only remedy to present discrimination is future discrimination. That's from Mr. Kendi. As I discuss in greater detail below, Kendi's description is correct. Anti-racism demands race-based discrimination, which of course is unconstitutional. It's also illiberal. A few more things here. But first, let me state the obvious. The Attorney General says, committing racial discrimination in the name of ending racial discrimination is both illogical and illegal. And from an opinion, he cites, the way to stop discrimination on the basis of race is to stop discriminating on the basis of race. To assist schools and other governmental entities with compliance, what follows is a list of widely reported anti-racist and CRT-related activities that I conclude violate federal and state laws. They fall under three prohibited categories, which often overlap: racial segregation, race stereotyping, and race scapegoating. These concepts violate civil rights laws because they constitute racial harassment and or require authority figures to engage in activities that result in different treatment on the basis of race. Now, for all you First Amendment fans who want to bring this up about CRT, he goes on. As discussed below, there are legitimate pedagogical uses for elements of the CRT anti-racism curricula that do not violate state or federal law. Some aspects raise no legal concerns. Some only raise legal concerns when mandated or applied in a way that is discriminatory. And some may not be discriminatory without other elements contributing to a hostile environment under the circumstances. There are also aspects of the curricula that may be expressly protected by the First Amendment. This opinion, therefore, should not be construed to limit a school or government entity's ability to use, present, or discuss these materials where appropriate. But the law will not tolerate schools, other government entities, or employers implementing CRT and anti-racist programming in a way that treats individuals differently on the basis of race or that creates a hostile environment. So in other words, sure, in school, at an appropriate age, you can talk about things like the Communist Manifesto. First Amendment said the most hateful things can be discussed. but then they can be discussed and found out to be the useless pieces of trash that they are. Now, this brings up an interesting question that I posed to the Attorney General, is that what level can students process such ideas? You can't expect a second grader to read the Communist Manifesto and understand it. When these competing ideas of societal structure are discussed as theories, at what level is that appropriate? Pre-K, grade school, middle school, high school, undergraduate, or postgraduate? It all depends upon your sophisticated and ability to learn and your unbiased development of critical thinking abilities. So like you said, yeah, you can talk about these things in the appropriate places, but you can't discriminate against certain students. He goes on to then list a whole variety of situations in the schools that would trigger compliance issue with federal and Montana laws. And again, we have similar laws here in Indiana. Okay. Additionally, a school that permits, promotes, or endorses curricula or pedagogical methods that tell an individual that he or she should feel discomfort, guilt, anguish, or any other form of psychological distress on account of his or her race almost certainly creates a racially hostile environment. He goes on. Trainings and programming like that discussed above perpetuate and glorify racial stereotypes and division. This upside-down ideology may be fashionable with the armchair revolutionaries in academia, but its compulsions have no place in our governmental, educational, or employment settings. And he begins to conclude. Finally, I would like to briefly discuss one important aspect of this issue in the educational context. Federal and state civil rights laws protect students from prohibited discrimination, but they are not intended to restrict expressive activities or speech protected under the First Amendment. Like I said before, this is an important distinction. He goes on to state, there are numerous bad ideas and fraudulent curricula that do not violate civil rights laws. Like the Communist Manifesto, bad idea. Let's talk about it. Nothing in this opinion shall be construed to restrict any expressive activities protected under the U.S. Constitution, including academic freedom or student political speech. He goes on. These are important points. CRT and anti-racist ideas may be bandied about like any other. Let the marketplace of ideas be the judge. I predict it will not be kind. This opinion concerns race-based treatment, classifications, and compulsions that arise from CRT and anti-racism theory. Finally, government entities such as public schools, public colleges, and universities, and government agencies are subject to the First Amendment. The First Amendment prevents the government from restricting protected speech, but it also prevents compelled speech. And in a decision, he quotes, "Freedom of speech includes both the right to speak freely and the right to refrain from speaking at all." So he goes on, "It is that no official, high or petty, can prescribe what shall be orthodox in politics, nationalism, religion, or other matters of opinion, or force citizens to confess by word or act their faith therein." So to compel little children to forced confessions is unconstitutional and illegal. And he concludes. Yes, I know you're all breathing a sigh of relief from my rambling. His conclusion: according to Abraham Lincoln, the Declaration's central proposition that all men are created equal was the standard maxim for a free society. Even today, it remains our true north. And I believe this is a quote from Lincoln. Familiar to all, revered by all, constantly looked to, constantly labored for, and even though never perfectly attained, constantly approximated, and thereby constantly spreading and deepening its influence and augmenting the happiness and value of life to all people of all colors everywhere. And the Attorney General concludes, the only viable path to a more just future and a more perfect union is to live up to our creed, not to abandon it. Live up to our creed, not abandon it. So there you have it, Hoosiers. I'm sorry that was a little choppy. But this is the strategy. If you read it yourself, it will flow better. This is the strategy we need to use against the threat posed by CRT and the other components of identity-based Marxism. And you know what? It is a brilliant in its simplicity. It is simply the Constitution solution. And it does not necessarily require any new legislation. It only requires that the Attorney General of, say, Indiana, and for that matter, every county commissioner, mayor, sheriff, etc., to live up to their oath in Article 15, Section 4 of the Indiana Constitution, which I shall quote. Every person elected or appointed to any office under this Constitution shall, before on the duties thereof, take an oath or affirmation to support the Constitution of this state and of the United States, and also an oath of office. So there you have it, the Constitution solution. And a corollary to this strategy, the ultimate rescue of our constitutional republic must come. It must come with parental choice education. Parental choice education. And that, in the end, will mean separation of school and state. Separation of school and state. Well, I've got to run to work, so I'll see you next on Thursday, August the 5th at 7 p.m. Then summer vacation's over, so we'll resume the usual every 2-week schedule and continue to go through what remains of the Indiana Constitution. So, here we go, Hoosiers. Remember doctor's advice. Wash your hands. Don't touch your face. And above all, keep your distance. Keep your distance from those socialist, statist, globalist, collectivist politicians and bureaucrats. Because now, Hoosiers, you know exactly who they are. The curtain has been pulled back, and they can no longer hide. We have only 10 months in order to save the sovereign state of Indiana. 10 months, Hoosiers. So let's get to work. Remember, don't just know your Constitution, live it. Let's go, Hoosiers. 2022 elections. Drain the Indy swamp. Thank you, and good afternoon. Boy, I hope this worked.